Hello, lovely people. Another beautiful but chilly day today in the UK. Today we're going to do another experiment. I did something similar like this before, but I want to just redo it again because I have a better microphone. Everything is a little bit better than last time. We're going to see what kind of influence filling has on the performance of a sealed enclosure. So for the new people on my channel, this is an Alpine HDZ-110 11-inch subwoofer in a 1.1 cubic feet sealed enclosure, which is, after displacement, something like 28 liters or 1 cubic foot, which is optimal for this subwoofer. Now, what we hear online always is that if you have a subwoofer enclosure that is too small for that specific subwoofer, just put some filling inside and automatically by magic is going to become bigger and the subwoofer will perform better. Is this the case? Today we're going to find that out. So the plan for today is just very quickly take literally just two measurements. One measurement is before the filling with an absolutely empty box, and second measurement with the filling added. Now I am planning to use maybe two different amounts of filling. One just to fill it a little bit loose, and the second one to fill it properly. Now obviously there are some rules how much filling you need to add, but I don't want to follow the rules. What I want to do is I want to see how the filling in general affects the performance of a box and how the amount of filling changes that. So the third filling one I'm just gonna cram as much filling inside as I possibly can. The subwoofer will be suffocated. It's highly not advisable, but I just want to see what it does and I want to show you what happens when you put too much filling in the enclosure. The filling that I'm going to be using is, in the UK, Dodo is a sound treatment product company and they have various different products. So this is a thermal fleece, but as you can see, 100% polyester. So it's typical normal filling that you can have in pillows or wherever. It has some acoustical properties, but in this specific case, it's advertised as a thermal thing for vans, camper vans, and like big cavities. But so I'm going to be using this. Now, what is the purpose of filler in general, and is it needed for subwoofer applications and for sealed enclosures? A lot of people ask about ported enclosures. So for ported enclosures, filling is absolutely not necessary because what it does is going to restrict the airflow that's coming through the port, and it's not going to be good results because for the ported box, you want the airflow to be as smooth as possible. That's why you put in the very nice corners and you put roundovers on the port so the airflow would be as smooth as possible. The purpose of the filling, primary purpose of the filling, is not to make the enclosure seem to be bigger for the subwoofer. What we have in a typical enclosure is that the subwoofer, obviously it plays outside, but at the same time you have the back wave that's going inside the subwoofer box and it does something. Now that's something what people are calling box colorization, that basically the sound is colorized by the box itself. And the only way how to avoid this is to have an infinite baffle setup where you don't have that enclosure and nothing influences the sound that's coming from the cone of the driver into our vehicle. Now, what is that colorization? When subwoofer is playing, it's playing out and it plays in. All the sound that's going inside is being dampened by the actual enclosure itself, the cone, the motor force, basically the whole system. However, some specific frequencies can still influence the actual cone and the response that's coming out of the subwoofer. How that happens? We have things which are called standing waves. So under certain circumstances, those circumstances being the dimensions of your panels, of your box, and the frequency that the driver is playing. If you have a driver playing a frequency that corresponds to the length of half wave of that frequency, or like multiples of it, like a full wave, 1.5 waves, 2 waves, those are going to be standing waves. Now, if you use any kind of online calculator that converts frequency into wavelength distance, we can find out what would be the standing waves for a specific enclosure. This enclosure, you can see it's a cube, so it has all 3 dimensions identical. And from standing waves perspective, this is the worst possible case scenario because you will have the same frequency standing waves in all directions and they're going to be very prominent. Now, if you want to minimize that, when you're making an enclosure, you should make it according to some people call it like golden ratio. You can Google it about it online. But basically what happens is that you're making an enclosure with the dimensions so that all three dimensions would be very, very different, and there would not be multiples of each other, so that all three standing waves would be a different frequency. That's how you basically minimize it. But this is where confusion comes in, because a lot of people think that we need to deal with this in car audio applications or generally in subwoofers. This is not the case. If you convert the distance, which is in my case is about 35 centimeters, which is close to a foot, if you convert that into wavelength and chop it in half, because we're interested in a half a wavelength, basically in this enclosure from any side you can fit a sound wave that is about 490 hertz. So the lowest frequency standing wave that can fit in this enclosure is 490 hertz, and multiples of it, like 2 times and 3 times, which are very high frequencies. For this subwoofer that plays nothing below, I don't know, 100 or 90 hertz, this is absolutely not a concern. If you would have a bigger box that would have one dimension like double of that, 70 centimeters or 2 feet, that frequency would be half of that, which would be 245 hertz, which is still way above the frequency that the driver is playing. That's why for subwoofer applications, filling in regards to dealing with standing waves has no merit at all. This is applicable only for home audio, where you have bookshelf speakers and you have a woofer like 6.5 or 8-inch woofer that is crossed into a tweeter, maybe like at 1,000 or 2,000 hertz, and then those standing waves will have a huge impact. If you would have, like, imagine a bookshelf speaker like half the size of this, yeah, so one of the dimension will cause a standing wave of 490 hertz. Now if you're playing a woofer up to 1 kilohertz or 2 kilohertz, those 490 hertz will be in the bandpass where that driver is playing, and it will influence the response coming out of the driver. It could be a dip or it could be a peak. But again, for subwoofer applications, it doesn't make sense because those frequencies are much, much higher. Another thing with enclosure is panel resonances. Now, panel resonances, again, they will happen at much, much higher frequencies because it depends on the material that you use. It depends on how much bracing you have and stuff. But filling is not going to deal with that at all. So in our case, for subwoofer applications in a car, we will be using the filling literally just to try to kind of utilize that small enclosure to make the subwoofer see it as a bigger enclosure, because if you put some filling inside, all the air that is going through this is going to slightly slow down, and it's going to affect the damping of the enclosure, and it will affect some stuff. So this is the theory. Now the practice. What I want to measure is 3 things. I want to measure far field response, which is microphone in the headrest, real world scenario, not outside of the car, not ground plane measurements, real world in the car like it is. So far field, then near field, I'm going to stick the microphone right next to the cone just to see the low end response properly. And the third measurement is going to be the impedance graph of this whole system, because damping will affect the impedance peak. Maybe it's going to shift the frequency. I don't know. We're going to see. But in general, today we're going to find out how much filling affects stuff, what actually it affects, and most importantly, can you substitute some filling for a proper size of an enclosure? Because again, online you have stuff, rules of thumb flowing around where people say that, oh, for like 1 cubic foot of airspace you have to use X amount of grams of or ounces of the filling, and then it will apparently increase the apparent volume by 10 or 15%, whatever those rules of thumbs are. So today we're gonna actually test it, because I don't like rules of thumbs. What I like is actual data that we can look at. So at the moment, this subwoofer box is totally empty. There's no filling inside. So I'm going to do those 3 measurements: far field, near field, impedance, and then we're going to start filling it up and repeating the measurements. Okay, first measurement. This is the situation with the near field measurement. Microphone is right there. I'm just making this more for myself than for you, so I would remember. The near field minus 23 dB, and the normal one is minus 3 dB over there. And finally, the impedance graph. So this is my connection to the subwoofer interface. You won't be able to hear anything, but we have a quick weep, 5-second weep. And we have impedance, where we have 2.2 ohms because it's wired in parallel to double force. And we're going to do exactly the same with the filling. Okay, the subwoofer is out because I'm ready to put the filling in. I looked at the recommendations, what people online say about the filling. So for 1 cubic foot, which is this box, people recommend 1 to 1.5 pound, which is about 450 grams, up to like 700 grams of filling. So I think what we're going to do is, because this I have here, you can see here is 230 grams, which is close to half a pound. So I'm going to try, because man, I think 1.5 pounds is going to be a lot. So I'm going to try half a pound, which is 200, whatever that is. Then I'm going to try 450 grams, which is going to be a full pound. And then 1.5 pound, because 1.5 pound, 3 of this is going to be a lot. So first one is this one, and then 2 more. The stuff is inside, but man, to me it looks a lot. Like, I tried to just put it in, not to squash too much, but with such big of a driver like that, I think it's gonna be too much. Like, if I would have done it by myself without any measurements on anything, I wouldn't put that much. So yeah, let's start with this one, and then we'll see. I'm gonna put more, and maybe I'm gonna put less as well. First row of measurements are done. This is another 230 grams, so another half a pound. So it's gonna be a full pound. Man, it's so tight. Like, look, I'll have to put the subwoofer. The subwoofer has to go in. I think this is because this sub is so big, it takes a lot of space, so it's going to be literally suffocated. So I think this is going to be my measurement where, as I said, this is going to be full to the brim filled. And then the third one I'm going to do, I'm going to put like a 1/4 pound, just very, very little and very fluffy around it. Okay, so I feel that all of that was way too much. So for the last one, I'm not going to go high, I'm going to go lower. So 120 grams, which is going to be 1/4 pound for my lovely American friends, because this amount feels like better suited, so I can fluff it out a little bit. Because now it's very compressed, so I'm going to fluff it out and we'll see what it does. All the data is here. It's not much, just 5 measurements. First, we're going to have a look at the impedance, and then we're going to have a look at the RTA. Impedance above 70 hertz, you can see here. It's exactly the same, so it doesn't change anything. And now, as I mentioned before about the standing waves and everything, if there would be any standing waves, here we have some little blips and peaks in the impedance graphs, but we don't have anything. So let's zoom in, because we want to have a look in the very, very zoomed in way. Okay, free air resonance. Here we have an FS of this driver in free air 34-35 hertz, which is fine. When you put it in a sealed enclosure, obviously the FS, that means FB, is gonna go higher. Now let's remove this. And from impedance graphs, what we can see is with no fill, 120 grams, 230 and 460. So for my American friends, it's gonna be 1/4 pound, half a pound, and a full pound of filling. And we see these graphs, they go down. So basically the filling, it reduces the impedance peak, basically from, in my case, from 18 ohms all the way down to 14 ohms. However, we do have some stuff happening. So no fill is the nicest graph. We do have a little bit of a blip here for some reason, not sure why. But all the other graphs, you can see they're not as nice and not as smooth. Let's have a look one by one actually. No fill, the nicest one, we have a little blip here at 26 hertz. Okay, 120 grams, 1/4 pound. It's nice. We have a little wobbly here on the side, you can see, at higher frequencies, and a little bit of a wobble next to the peak itself. 230, which is half a pound. Yeah, we have much more wobbles in the impedance graph. Why that's happening, I have no idea. And 460, which is a full pound, we have the most jaggedy impedance graph response all the way C in the lower frequencies as well. So this is, I don't know, restricting airflow, probably. No idea. But the more filling we put, the more nasty the impedance graphs becomes. You can see with no filling, it's smooth apart from this little wiggle. But with the most filling that we added, is the nastiest. Now, another thing that we notice is that the FB is going a little bit lower. So from about 39.5 hertz with no filling FB, we went down by just less than 1 hertz down. So the FB goes down, but very, very, very little. Now let's have a look at the RTA. So it sweeps up to 500 hertz, and here are the results. As I mentioned, I did near field and I did far field. First, let's have a look at the near field responses if we see any changes. So the main changes we see, no fill. Yeah, if I'm going to remove this one, all the other fillings are very, very extremely similar. We have a difference of maybe a 0.3 of a dB, half of a dB. The least differences we see with more filling, which is literally nothing. 120 grams, it reduced this peak a little bit, and with no filling, we have the highest level basically, but this is near field, it's not as accurate. However, if we compare the most filling with no filling, the difference is, it's nothing. The biggest we see here between 45 and 57, but overall, if I can make a conclusion from the near field response, is that the more filling you add, the more sensitivity you're losing, because with no filling, you can see we do have maybe like half a dB or 1 dB more level throughout the whole range. So yeah, you're losing sensitivity, and it makes sense. Now let's have a look at the far field response. This is a response with no filling. When we add some 120 grams, I'm just gonna change the color. There is a little bit of a difference, but not that huge. Surprisingly, this one basically disappears, which is 284. 284 times 2, 560, because you remember the standing wave was 490, so 490 divided by 2 would be 245. So it's not the standing wave, it's something else. It might be some kind of maybe driver resonance or something, but the response itself, I don't want to say it's very, very different. There are some differences, but not massive. So let's add more filling, and not really big of a difference. And the most amount of filler, kind of the same, I want to say. So between half a pound and a full pound, we don't really see any difference basically. Just the level. You can see, like, if I highlighted it, we have these peaks a little bit higher with less filling, so you're losing the sensitivity. If we do this 120 and 460, it's kind of the same, and with no filling, again, more sensitivity. You're just losing sensitivity, that's all. So this is exactly the same conclusion that I had in my previous video, what I did with a front subwoofer. Because look, I want to show you this one. If we are aligning the drivers like somewhere here, let's say, yeah, so we can say that with no filling, it's playing a little bit louder, like 1.5 dB louder than with full filling. But if I'm gonna take this one, measurement 460, and I'm gonna raise it up just to match that top end, something like this. You can see I matched this area, but I increased it by 1.8 decibels. And if this is exactly the same following, then we have a little bit more bottom end. But in reality, you're not gaining the bottom end, you're literally losing sensitivity in the higher frequencies. And this is why when you have a look at the responses by themselves and you ignore the sensitivity and the power, it might look like the driver is behaving as if it's in a larger box, because in the larger box you're gonna have a little bit more bottom end, but in reality you're just losing sensitivity here, and that's why it looks like that. So no, it doesn't act as if being in a larger box. It's just a difference in sensitivity between higher and lower frequencies. One more thing that I want to have a look is the impulse and the distortion of the far field measurements. And aha, okay, so this is a big difference. So here we have no filling, where distortion is at the highest, up to 2% all over the place. And if I'm gonna remove this, yeah, it doesn't really matter how much filling you add, it reduces the distortion. So this is a surprising part because I didn't look at these measurements before I'm literally doing this live. I just took the measurements and now I'm looking at them. And the more filler you put, we can see the distortion is lower at higher frequencies, but we have a little bit of a peak here. But even if we add just 120 grams, which is a quarter of a pound, that compared to no filling, it reduces the distortion massively. Wow. Okay, so this is very surprising. Even if it doesn't change the response much, if we're gonna go back to SPL, no filling, and 120 grams. It changes a little bit, but not that much. Let's have a look where the distortion is reduced. It's mainly above 100, so 120, which is here. So we can see the difference in the frequency response here as well, the biggest. And the second place is, well, let's say 42 hertz. Can we see anything at 42? Here. Okay, that is interesting. So, theory. It could be because of the reflections that's happening inside of the box. And this filler kind of scatters those reflections, maybe it doesn't absorb much because it's very thin compared to the wavelengths. So, but it does something, and this is very interesting. So adding a little bit of a filler, because a lot of people say that with a little filler, it sounds nicer. And this could be the thing because you're reducing the distortion. You can see here from 2% all the way down to 0.3. So this is a massive reduction in distortion. Wow. Okay, let's have a look at the impulse. Let's have a look. No filler, 120 grams. I want to say kind of the same. Maybe a little bit less here. You can see above like 60 milliseconds. All the way up to 100. Here, these peaks are a little bit smaller. Let's see, 230 grams. Kind of the same. Doesn't change anything. 460 grams. Yeah, the same. So half a pound and a full pound is the same in distortion and frequency response in this. It doesn't change much. But the biggest difference we see is with no filling and just a little bit of filling. It's either a quarter of a pound, either half a pound. This is interesting. Can we see anything in group delay? Because group delay is going to be mainly the enclosure itself. So there is something here between these. Yeah, but between all the different fillings, it's not a huge of a difference at all. But the biggest difference is no filling and just a little bit of a filling. So we can see in some places it's higher, in some places it's lower, which is weird. But the distortion, this is a discovery for me. This is exactly why I'm doing these things. Because most of the stuff that's online, they don't go into detail and they don't show this, what we found. If we have a look again at the impedance graph, no filling and 120 filling, it does reduce the peak a little bit. It's not as jaggedy. With the frequency response, again, there is a little bit of a difference, but not massive. We cannot say that the filling drastically changes the frequency response, not at all. The biggest difference from all of this is in the distortion. The sun came out, it's very nice, but I might have some rain. Conclusion time! Filling, should you put some in your enclosure? Definitely yes. Not because you want to increase the apparent volume, but because it might sound better? I don't know. Again, this is one experiment with one subwoofer. Your mileage may vary. I just had a quick listen, about 10-15 minutes, to some songs that I know very, very well. Personally, I cannot really tell the difference, and this comes down with, again, psychoacoustics, distortion of sub bass below 80 hertz. If it's less than 1% or if it's 2%, you're not gonna hear it, but it will show up in the measurements. How much that matters? I don't know. Again, I didn't hear the difference. Maybe if you have extremely sensitive hearing, if you have golden ears, super SQ, maybe you will be able to hear the difference. I don't know, but yeah, put some filling, not a lot. So in 1 cubic foot, I put a quarter of a pound, which is 130 grams. I'm gonna leave it there for now, because why not? And again, I hope you learned something, because I learned something as well. If you know the reason why is distortion decreasing with some filler, pop it in the comments below. I would like to know, because I'm learning together with you. You're learning with me, I'm learning with you. That's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.